Howdy partners, it's so good to be here again, as always. I'm finally wrapping out the last of the 2024 films that I wanted to see of that year, so I am getting ready for that year-end list. It is coming up. And once again, I spent another lovely night at Cinema du Parc. As always, I do love going to that cinema, and if you are in Montreal and you've never been, what are you waiting for? In any case, I went to see Universal Language, a film that was Canada's entry into the Oscars for the Best International Film category. It did not get nominated, it is too bad, but it did get a decent amount of buzz nonetheless, either from that piece of news or from word of mouth, or the reception it got at the Cannes Film Festival, which was pretty warm, all things considered. So this was a very peculiar and rather absurd film. Throughout most of the film, I wasn't exactly sure where we were going with this film, but I was intrigued right from the start, and I just surrendered myself to its flow. And boy was I glad I did. It does feature a rather atypical narrative structure. We got pretty much 3 storylines in parallel. The first covers the story of these kids that found this banknote frozen in ice and they're just trying to get it out. And so they go on this like citywide odyssey to just get the tools and help to be able to retrieve this banknote. This kind of journey reminds me of a film earlier this year called Riddle of Fire, where those kids were going everywhere on their quest for blueberry pie. And if we were to peek a little bit behind the curtains, this is a story that is very personal to Matthew Rankin, the director and co-writer of this film, who has echoed a story that his grandmother used to tell him as a child that pretty much mirrors itself into this film. There are a lot of really endearing and personal details embedded into this film, and I do find that it creates a very enriching experience. And when it comes to the second storyline, we are following the story of Masoud, this tour guide who's taking these poor tourists on this very cold and mundane trip through Winnipeg to take a look at their eccentric and bizarre landmarks. There's some cringe comedy gold buried within these moments. Then the third plotline is a very autobiographical look at Matthew Rankin, who is the director and once again co-writer of this film, who plays himself in this character, who's quitting a very unfulfilling job at the Quebec government to then journey all the way to Winnipeg to then reconnect with his family. I do find it interesting that even though this is a film that's happening totally in Canada, is a film that's pretty much all spoken in Farsi, and we do have a full Iranian cast here as well. And I do find it interesting as well that apart from a few choice exceptions, they're pretty much all by profession non-actors. And even though they're all amateurs as it were, they're each wonderful in their performances and have great timing as well. And though indeed most of the film is spoken in Farsi, there are a few moments of Quebec or French sprinkled throughout the experience, which for me being in Montreal, I was very much tickled by some of those scenes happening in Montreal. This is such a surreal and absurd moment that really hit close to home. But imagine that even for other people who aren't from Montreal are still gonna get a kick out of this scene. Oh my god, what just happened over there? But yes, this is a very curious hybrid of Iranian, Quebec, and Winnipeg cinema, and I am very much amused that the director himself refers to this film as this Hawaiian pizza experience. A hilarious and appropriate way of approaching it. And the end result is just as quirky and bizarre as you might think. So as I've alluded to several times now, the film has a very quirky sense of humor. It might oftentimes be a little incomprehensible, but it is always engaging and constantly amusing. Whether it be from the outrageous reactions from the very salty school teacher, in the face of these endearing and eccentric kids who are just talking about their passions and who they want to be when they grow up. Honestly, the kids were wonderful in this film. I really got a laugh out of them. And then there are the even more eccentric citizens of Winnipeg who have very peculiar professions and they're really excited about what they do. For a few brief examples, there's this cake seller. There's also this Kleenex entrepreneur, which was a sight to behold. But my favorite has to be the turkey merchant. And yes, there is a whole thing with turkeys in this film. And the turkeys give a shockingly wonderful performance. Who would have thought it would turn out this great? And indeed, there is a turkey featured in some of the alternate film posters. I admit I had a really hard time choosing for this video which poster I wanted to use. They're all great in their own unique fashion. But personally, I went for the hug, which in the film, it was like the longest hug ever. But that's okay. I think we all need that kind of intimacy and warmth every now and then in our life, especially in such a frigid climate. And then aesthetically, the film also has a very curious flavor. Yeah, everything about this film is just a little atypical and out there. And I do mean that in a positive sense. It is quite a strange world we inhabit here for about 89 minutes of our lives. In this kind of Iranian dreamlike world in the middle of Canada. And it is surprising to see all this brutalist architecture shown on screen. It's quite a potent vibe. That and an exquisitely beautiful Tim Hortons. Of all things, I know. I mean, it is Canada, I guess. But then the color palette is something that also resonates quite strongly with me. I'd say the color beige is the one that's most prevalent in the film. But personally, I would say it was this soft pink color palette that really resonated the most with me. It was a very refreshing contrast in this frigid landscape. And perhaps this is a me thing because I do think it is a wonderful coincidence that this color of all colors would show up quite so often in this film on this night of all days. Yeah, this is something that is just showing up in my life everywhere right now, and I'm kind of loving it. Anyways, to bring it back to the story, I love how, once again, this atypical narrative structure, by the end of the film, comes full circle in a very surprising and satisfying way. That is, before ending on a rather bewildering and open-ended conclusion. I dare say we were all quite befuddled by the ending of that film, but I do think it is part of its poetic charm that I absolutely loved about this film. So I'd say this is a solid 8 out of 10. I truly appreciate how all these storylines, whether it be the kids on their odyssey to get that banknote out of the ice, or the adults going through their midlife crisis, whatever it is they're going through, and how all these storylines converge together through time and space into this one dreamlike space in the middle of Winnipeg of all places. I think this is a really original way of depicting this endearing Iranian community in the middle of Winnipeg. God, I love the language of cinema. I really enjoyed my night. And as an extra bonus, I was delighted to learn that Denis Villeneuve is also a huge fan of this film, and he actually took it upon himself to just find his guy Matthew Rankin and do a short interview with him. I do invite you all to listen to it because I thought it was quite revealing, and there's some very interesting stories, and we do get an idea into the kind of creative, collaborative process that Matthew Rankin explores. It's something very inspiring, and he seems like a really soulful guy. So yeah, I highly recommend this film, regardless if you're Canadian or not. So with all that being said, wishing you and your loved ones nothing but the best. Take care and talk to you soon.